until it shows us that we're live, and then we'll give our official hello.
Exactly.
Okay, it says end stream, so I think we must be streaming live. Hello, everybody. Let me just double check my phone here.
Hello,
Please
hello, good
excuse the,
morning.
does it show you that we're streaming?
It says seven watching. I don't see it. It says waiting for the Goddess TV.
Okay, does anybody else see us? Can anyone see us? See us?
There we are.
Okay, sweet. We did it. Welcome, everybody. Phew. One day I will master. I will master the technique of streaming live on YouTube. But if anybody out there in YouTube land wants to help us out with that, I might gladly take you up on it. Maybe be our moderator too. Um,
Exactly, exactly. We are live though. We are live.
okay, great. Sweet. Okay, welcome
Morning,
everybody.
everybody.
Welcome. Welcome. Hi. Hi, welcome, Dr. Andrea. Would you like to
Welcome,
introduce
welcome, Dr.
yourself?
Annalisa. Hi.
Hi.
As you can tell, we are not the tech mavens of the universe, but welcome to Goddess Matters. My name is Dr. Andrea Slaminski. Most people call me Dr. A because you can't pronounce or say my last name, or Andrea, whatever. Yeah, I'm a women's therapeutic midlife and menopause coach, um, working in the field of mythology and storytelling and the reclaiming of our lives at midlife and menopause, and the creation of who we want to be and what we want to do next. And my background is in mythological studies with an emphasis in depth psychology. Dr. Annalisa and I were lucky enough to sort of pass each other a little bit in our cohorts at the same school. And so we finally come back around together in the circle of spirals, the way things are. And she's invited me to co-host this. So I'm really pleased to be here.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really, really happy that you said yes. Before we move on to me, would you like to also share your current and upcoming offers?
Oh, sure. Let's see. Starting next week, if you go to my website, the link is in the show notes or will be in the show notes. You can go to classes. I'm starting the 8-week deep dive into Women Who Run with the Wolves, which is a great online class studying 8 chapters of that incredibly consequential book for women in midlife. And we'll be doing that. I have 2 sections. One is on Tuesday night at 6:30 and Wednesday afternoons at 3:30. Both are Pacific time. They're set up that way so the afternoon class people on the East Coast and Central time can jump in. And then this week, actually Thursday, I'm doing an hour-and-a-half workshop called The Victory of Ariadne, Victory After Abandonment, Disrespect, and Disillusionment. And that is a deep dive, well, for an hour and a half anyway, into the myth of Ariadne and Theseus and how that myth can show us how to recover ourselves and start again if we've experienced abandonment, disrespect, or disillusionment, either in personal relationships, family relationships, career relationships. So that's coming up in the Women's Wisdom Village. You can find that under events in my website. And as always, I have one-on-one coaching and a membership and all kinds of stuff. So, but thank you for asking. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. And all of that information will be, I've already listed it in the YouTube text box. So you can go there to find out more and to join on Thursday. I'll be there as well. And that class on Ariadne seems to weave itself into our conversation today as we'll be talking about patriarchy, power, and the Epstein. I know we have scandal, but it's like it's such this disaster. Um, Anyway, but before we get into that, I will introduce myself as well. I'm Dr. Annalisa Durr. I am a goddess scholar, educator, and embodiment facilitator. I just completed my manuscript, my book on the goddess Inanna, thank you, and resacralizing the menstrual cycle, where I reimagine her descent myth as a menstrual cycle journey. It's much more than that in a way. It's about learning how to awaken to the deep feminine power within, and the menstrual cycle is one portal to do such. And the work that I do in that book and beyond that book is to help women go from patriarchal daughters to sovereign women. So you're identifying your internalized sexism and how that works within you, and how to free yourself from it, and how to awaken to that deep feminine power and become sovereign. And so my current offering, besides the book, which will come out in the fall, um, is my Mary Magdalene pilgrimage, which will take place in May in the south of France, in Provence, at the cave in Provence, and also at the Romani Gypsy Festival on the 24th, 25th of May. So I'm really looking forward to having you join me. So those links are also in the YouTube text box. But let's like dive right in now. Let's like circle back to why we're here. I'm sure everyone's really excited to be a part of this conversation. Not sure if excited is the right word, but you know what I mean. Um, and so, yeah, so we're here to talk about the big elephant in the room, as you've described it, Dr. Andrea. And so, my hope for today is that we're offering a perspective, the sacred feminine lens. This is a big conversation that I think that we could be having continuously, and maybe we will continuously weave it into our conversations. And we're offering a perspective. I hope that we'll start with the roots, what we see as the root causes of this monster, and then maybe the arc of the conversation might be, what are some of the antidotes? What can we do? How does our work weave in to be part of the healing to this problem? Um, so I think with that, Andrea, do you want to start?
Um, sure. I think we were going to, we just started the show and we're, putting together a great lineup of scholars and people to come on in discussion with us. And this is really the second time, obviously, that we've been live, but for the most part, from here on out, we're going to have other women joining us in a roundtable view like discussion. And we were going to this morning talk about dive in depth into our work, what we both do in our entrepreneurial careers and working with women. And then we were both saying, this, not talking about what's going on with the Epstein files, with the incredible horrific details that have come out, with the still missing files, with the abuse of the women, being that we work in the field of the sacred feminine, in the field of mythology, goddesses, archetypes,
Depth
not
psychology.
depth psychology, archetypal psychology. Not talking about it is ignoring the bright putrid green elephant sitting next to us in the room. So we're like, okay, we gotta dive in. And it's a really difficult topic, but I think if we take the mythic view, or what I always call as the top-down view, the mythic view of the situation, I think we can see that this situation, or this horrific expose, has roots that are very, very deep in our culture. And certainly, patriarchy is one of the big buzzwords in culture, um, especially in feminist or spiritual feminist circles. And yeah, patriarchy is part of it, right? There's a thousands of years historical, um, documented history of what has happened in culture, right? Since the overthrow, or the changing, or the transformation of what was originally believed to be matriarchal and matrilineal cultures that involved the feminine divine as aspects of worship, goddess worship, also God worship in antiquity as well. But
Yeah.
but that was part of it. So I know that trying to look at this from a larger perspective, what we want to talk about, at least initially, is how how was the stage set for this, for things to become so out of balance in culture. And one aspect of it is the sexual oppression, demonization, and disrespect of women and children.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, so I think that that is a good laying a good foundation. I think too, it's important. Okay, I also forgot to tell everybody that please add your comments and your thoughts. We will periodically be looking at the chat to and like either integrating your comments or ideas into our conversation or responding to them. We want this to be as conversational as possible. Okay, so with that, so yeah, to add to the point that you made, patriarchy seems to be pretty much a universal system around the world at this point. There might be pockets of matriarchal or somewhat matriarchal societies, communities left. But patriarchy has done its job to dominate and conquest pretty much every culture imaginable to a certain degree, more or less degree. So, what I have my um, expertise in is actually looking at how patriarchy developed in the Middle East and then uh, infiltrated and continued on into what is Western society today. So that's what I can speak to. I can't really, I feel less comfortable speaking about, Asia, although we know that patriarchy happened in China as well, through different parts of Asia, in Egypt. Those things are happening kind of simultaneously, and then eventually, through its conquests, through the patriarchal conquests through Europe and then into the Americas. And I know less about the history of the Americas, so I don't know. Maybe there were patriarchal elements happening independently in the Americas too. So I just want to also say that I don't we can't we're just giving generalized ideas of how this happened based on what we know of history. And so I think it's also fair to say, like, what is patriarchy versus what is matriarchy, right? So patriarchy, the definitions that I follow involve a gender hierarchy of men over women and the way that that is instituted, through policies, through law, and then also the ideological definitions and the ways that those are used to reinforce the systems of control, usually over women's movement through society and also the control of women's reproductions. That is like reproduction that and our sexuality. Um, so there's the physical control and then there's the ideological control, which also mirrored what happened to the goddesses. You can really see how that happens in real time. And Gerda Lerner, who wrote the creation of patriarchy, details how that happens in the Mesopotamian system. And you can literally see how from the documents that are left to us in the cuneiform form, um, how women gradually lost their status through time, how in the beginning of Mesopotamian society, even though I don't think it was quite equal, you can see that at least elite women had access to private property. They could divorce. They were playing, important roles in society. And then with the implementation of laws like the Hammurabi codes, you see women gradually becoming men's property instituted into law. And at the same time, what you see, Maria Gimbutas, you talked about her in our last episode. She was really foundational in our understanding of prehistoric goddess worship in Anatolia, modern day Turkey, pretty much, and the Middle East, right? So what we have is evidence for, at best, matriarchal societies, as you said, which are egalitarian. They're based in principles of reciprocity, economic and political balance, where everything is shared and there's like a direct democracy, basically, where everybody's opinions and ideas and desires are taken into account. And there's elders are held in high esteem, and they're usually the ones that are the ones negotiating or the ones making maybe the final decisions in the society. And obviously there is no sex or gender hierarchies. There's no hierarchies at all, right? Everything is shared, and there's a balance and a complementarism. It doesn't mean there's not difference, but it's
Right, right, right.
complementary equality.
I just want to interject
Um,
a little thing in there.
yeah,
So
please.
in Gimbutas's work with the early matrilineal cultures, like in the Russian steppes, right? There were no weapons found. right?
Right.
There were no weapons found. They were seemingly peaceful agrarian, right? Cultures that had learned, and through the work of Carol Christ and the other uh, feminist spiritual leaders, but also archaeomythologists like Gimbutas and um, and other scholars in the field, anthropologists, whatever, that the big leap from hunter gatherers to agrarian organized tribes, villages, city states was precipitated by the inventions of what they think were invented by women, which is weaving, pottery, agriculture, and animal husbandry. So
Right.
at that point, what you're talking about in those matrilineal and matriarchal cultures, we have a peaceful, non-warlike, tribal existence, right? So I just wanted to,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, exactly. Yes. And based on basically the idea it's based on kinship ties where it's one big extended family. We're not people are related to each other. They get structured in such a way, I think, to prevent incest, for example, but you're kind of seen as one big extended family group. And then with the invention of patriarchy, well, the idea is that Maria Gimbuta has set forth, in which it is a theory, but part of it has been posthumously upheld, is that where there were groups of nomadic warriors that came in from the Russian steppes down into modern day Turkey and Mesopotamia, and then eventually spread west. There we go. Probably east too, but I've really only looked at the westward expansion. Um, and they brought with them their warrior culture, their dominating hierarchical structures, and she called them sky god worshiping gods that were warriors themselves, which you can see emulated in the mythologies, right? And then the mythologies that we have today, whether it's from Greece or Mesopotamia or even from the Hebrew Bible, you see these very violent warrior gods. Oh, Marduk, the famous one from the Enuma Elish from the Babylonian creation epic, right? Marduk, he slays his great goddess grandmother Tiamat and makes the cosmos from her dismembered body. And so that's the pattern that we see is the conquest of the great creatrix goddess. Whereas in these previous matriarchal egalitarian societies, the creatrix goddess was the one that gave life, sustained life, and took life and then rebirthed life, right? And the masculine principle was important too. She would say that the sacred masculine was the life sustainer, the life stimulator. That was part of the function of the sacred masculine and the protector, right? Like if you listen to indigenous communities today, they talk about the role of the masculine in indigenous communities as being protectorship. That is the sacred role of the male, or one of the main sacred roles. And so with these patriarchal societies coming in, we have one, the conquest of the great goddess and the diminishment of her creative powers in the mythological and religious worldview, taken over then by these male gods. And the male gods become the creators, and the female goddesses that remain get depotentiated and become like secondary creators. Like they're still needed, they're still recognized as needed for creation, except when we get to the Hebrew Bible. And there's only one male God who creates everything and controls all of creation. They're still needed for creation, but the male gods are seen as the primary creators. And one of the things I looked at in my doctoral work is how that was also paralleled in views about men and women and who creates in terms of men and women, right? So whereas previously, probably in these matriarchal societies, women were esteemed for their creative power and their womb power. And we can see that, right? And in the ways that the vulva is is emphasized in ancient prehistoric art. But then in the patriarchal societies, we see that men become seen as the creators of life, where literally the divine spark of life was believed to come through the male, from the divine womb, through the male semen and into the womb. And women's job was to form and create men's sperm into a human being. But we know this for sure in Greek, in the Hippocratic Greek corpus and through their mythologies. That is pretty well known and accepted. I think that was also true in Mesopotamia. There's evidence that they also had a similar worldview. I write about that in my dissertation and a bit in my book. And then also, there's a guy, Thomas Henke, I think his name is, who gave a similar analysis within the Hebrew, the the Jewish Bible, Torah, excuse me, it's not a Bible, Torah. And when you look at the Levitican laws.
Yeah.
So what we're really, I'll just cap it off here. What we're really seeing is two things happening: the conquest of the goddess
Mhm.
and the devaluation of her power and the devaluation of her status under the male gods. And the same thing happens simultaneously with women.
In the population. Yeah. There's a comment from Zeph 6439, which you may want to just take a quick look at.
The deliberate confusions of ages-old symbolic meaning became really pronounced during the Bronze Age, which was the age of the war gods. Yes, I think that that is another way of kind of saying what we're talking about here. Thank you, Zeph. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That is the time period, the Bronze Age.
Yeah. And it's that devaluation of the of the goddess as a part of the active creative process in the universe that also, like you're saying, the devaluation of women in culture. And then with the male sky gods, as opposed to the many of the female goddess representations were seen as imminent, like in the world, right?
Right.
But you could see them in nature, you could see them in the cycles of the seasons, that you could see the earth itself is, right? We say Mother Earth, right? That a lot of these ideas of of the goddess as the living goddess, as the all that exists in matter, as being having born from the cosmic womb, right? So then as we get this differentiation between male and female and the devaluation of the goddess and women, then what happens is, and we have only the male god, then we have the separation of women from their own divine image.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so there's two things happening at once, right? There's something happening in law to justify the need to control women, right? Control their reproduction. And then basically, on the one hand, like, when the patriarchal family unit was developed, right, it was to ensure that women were bearing men's legitimate heirs. So the whole institution of marriage and virginity is kind of believed to come from this whole milieu of the patriarchal family unit, because we always know who the mother is, right? But you don't always necessarily know who the father is. So both virginity and marriage necessitated that ability for men to know who their heirs were so that they could pass down their property. I think private property is another kind of problem in this equation,
Yeah.
in that if we think about it, in hunter-gatherer societies and probably in smaller communal matriarchal societies, there's no such thing as private property, because everybody, I think there's a different worldview which in seeing that they're in stewards, they're stewards to the land, they're stewards to life itself and one another. And you don't own anything or anybody. You're kin with not just one another, but with nature, with the animals, with the plants. You don't see yourself as above or below. You understand the intrinsic value of every single aspect of life. And so it's when this also, in addition, this concept of private property enters into human consciousness, that we also get a value. This is more valuable than that. That is more valuable than that. I want that. And then when we start settling down and accumulating goods, um, we then would have to build storehouses to save the accumulation of these
Yeah.
goods,
And then markets to sell them and everything.
markets to sell them and pass them down again to your legitimate heirs. So all of these pieces kind of coalesce to, I can't even say it was on purpose. It might have been just kind of what happened through our evolution. Who knows how it
Yeah.
happened? Heidi Goldberg Abendroth also talks about climate change and how climate change affected, how we ended up getting into, scarcity versus abundant, and people going off to find resources somewhere
Yeah.
else, and
Yeah.
then taking other people's resources anyway. So it's a whole big um, there's a lot of unknowns here. But what we can say is when history happened and we can see things written down, that again, the devaluation of women and the goddess in the patriarchal imagination is that both are property and in service to men. And when women are taught to also devalue themselves, and when men are taught to devalue women or see them as objects of men's sexual desire or men's property, and then women are taught that themselves and also to participate in that by selling their daughters off to men, for example, then we're in a system in which patriarchy can perpetuate itself,
Yeah.
where women are seen as property and instead of subjective human beings who have their own desires and wants and right to
Yeah.
self-determination.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I just want to add before we jump out completely out of history, and it's just sort of a side comment to what you're talking about, is that the matriarchal and matrilineal, for those that don't know, and you and I, of course, have studied this and talked about it quite a bit, but for those who don't know, in the early matrilineal societies, they were they were um, they were set up so that it was the female household. The male would marry into the female household, and property would pass down from mother to daughter, and that way. And so the household and the the structure of the family was from mother to daughter, and the man married in and left his family and joined the woman's family, and the property passed to his wife, not to him. And so what you're saying, and is what a lot of scholars and anthropologists feel is true, is what happened is that um as tribes and villages became more and more successful at, right, and there was the incursion of other cultures, and as there was surplus, right, that that the idea of patriarchal inheritance and lineage from the man to his son, right,
Right.
was the other flip that happened in terms of making sure that the power structures, along with everything else that was going on, now were passed from father to son and father to son.
Right. Exactly. And I think maybe one of the reasons this happened is because we have ideologically, right, where the divine passes through the male line
Yeah.
rather than previously probably where it passed through the female line.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's also important to stress, I don't want people to think that I'm saying that matriarchies valued women over men, because that's not what I mean. And I know that's not what you mean. They were both equally valued. But
It seems it's from the archaeological evidence and the anthropological evidence and the written evidence that we have from early, like as you said, from early cuneiform writings on the earliest traces that we have. Yes, it was more egalitarian, and
right.
and the worship of the goddess was something that was accepted and was a part of the cultural milieu for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I understand what we're about to do is we're gonna kind of leap toward Epstein, and that there's a big chunk of history in between what we're talking about, let's say about 2000 BCE, so about
Yeah.
4,000 years ago,
Yeah.
4 or 5,000 years ago till now. But what I see is happening, well, we just laid kind of the foundations for where we are today. Like what the Sumerians are credited, the Mesopotamians are credited for creating, which is patriarchy, which is hierarchical systems of men over women, which is the not the monetary system, but the taxation system, the writing system. War, they're credited for inventing large-scale warfare, prostitution, so prostitution came about. Let's just put this in here as an example. when women were divided into basically two different classes of males' property, right? You have the elite property women that were passed from, you know, one father to the husband, and then you have all the other women, maybe that were enslaved or concubines or just maybe were poor, for poor for some reason, who didn't have the same, who had even less rights than the elite women in a sense, and many times were sold into prostitution by their fathers or were, you know, taken in war and sold into prostitution that way. Um, you know, it seems that in Mesopotamia there was maybe a class of women, maybe this is debated right now, that maybe chose prostitution as an economic, as a means to, you know, economy. That's debatable. Um, but basically, what we're seeing is the class divide of prostitution exists because of the two different classes of women that were created. So it, you know, but both of them are basically men's property, and both of them are meant to service men's sexual desires and inclinations. And that's relevant because we still have that going on today. So, do you have anything to say there before we jump into Epstein?
Yeah, I just there's the cultural trope that people say, well, prostitution is the oldest,
Hate that.
the oldest career in the world, or whatever profession in the world, right? And I think, um as we go forward, and we look at different cultures, yes, there are women who were trained, as concubines, who were trained in different cultures to service men, to pleasure men. And then there were women who were cast out by society, who had no other way to survive,
Hmm.
who had no other
Yeah.
way to survive. So it's it's a dangerous thing to throw around tropes.
Yeah,
When
totally.
yeah,
But yeah, but for, yeah, this because this isn't a conversation about prostitution. Actually, I think that we should talk about prostitution in another episode because I have a lot I want to say, and I think we could have a really rich conversation about it. But yeah, I some of the retorts I have heard from other feminists is like prostitution wasn't the oldest profession, midwifery was. Like, of course, like women helping other women through child. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, but the I guess the idea the suggestion is that patriarchy only exists in a system in which women are valued less than men and in which women can be bought and sold.
yeah,
But prostitution doesn't exist in systems where that is not the case, where women are valued equal to men and when there's no inequality in economy.
yeah. Not to get bogged down in the definition of patriarchy, or prostitution, or any of that, but I'm gonna give Anna a link to a PDF to put in the show notes. That's one of the best articles, or essays I've ever read on what patriarchy is in terms of how we live with it every day. It's really kind of an expanded view. It's by Alan G. Johnson, who was a a professor and very well esteemed in his field of sociology for many years, and taught at major universities. And it really, I think, gives a much more expanded modern perspective on how we are like the fish that swims in the water, doesn't see the water. Like, that's how all pervasive this cultural system that we live in is. Yeah.
Totally. Sometimes I like to think about patriarchy as a cult, but it's like the biggest cult that we live in. Like, you know how when you're in a cult, you just like don't even know that you're in it. You're just like bought into it. And you're like, yeah, of course. And I will be forthright here. I consider capitalism to be an arm of patriarchy.
Yeah.
I don't think capitalism would exist in a matriarchy or egalitarian system.
Yeah.
So, not to say it's not the worst of all the patriarchal systems, but it's not a great one either. I mean, look at all the things it's producing. Um, yeah, so thank you. Thank you for, so I'm like about to go down another tangent, and I know that we need to bring it back to, you know, the
Yeah.
current, the current situation. So thank you. Yeah, we'll link that in the notes. Um, so yeah, so, you know, I'll just say, you know, my thoughts as I've been thinking about this, listening, thinking, grieving, raging about what's happening in the collective. For me, it goes back to this fundamental question of how do we value women and the sacred feminine. And there's a complete erasure of the sacred feminine in our, as we've already discussed, with the conquest of the goddess and then her erasure in the monotheistic traditions. She's completely gone and not even undervalued, just gone, annihilated. Although, asterisks, there are some little places she appears in the Bible, but it's like you just kind of have to understand where that is. Um, so there's the devaluation of women and the feminine, all things considered feminine, coded feminine, right? Like we can see in our language the way that men are taught that to be feminine is is the worst thing that they could ever be, like with the word effemination, right? That's something a man would never want to be. Or like in our language we talk about have balls, and that's supposed to be like had strength. That's supposed to be like, you know, what a person should strive for. And don't be a pussy, right? A pussy is seen as weak and a weakness, and effeminates a man. And obviously, we know how amazing pussies actually are and how strong they actually are. So we should be talking about them in the reverse.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really about where I'm sitting with today is the devaluation. Not, it's more than devaluation. It's the misogyny, it's the hatred, and the fear of women, of the feminine, and of womb power. This great, incredible power women have to create life, which I do think stems from that initial switch from matriarchy to patriarchy, is to put the hands of creation in the hands of the masculine God and men. And so, yeah, and when you see women, when you're trained to believe that women are objects of men's desire and are property, um, I think that it lends too easily to women being treated as such. And the last thing I'll say about this for now, and then I'm going to shut up, and then I'm going to be quiet and let you talk.
It's okay.
um, is that I also feel like, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Darn it. I have.
We have so many
You,
things going through our minds simultaneously. It's
I
for,
know
yeah,
please
yeah.
jump in because I lost my train of thought.
I just, it's living in a culture where women are treated as property, right?
Yep.
From the very time, and it's getting a little better now, but it's still not solved. It's, let's not kid ourselves, but from the time women are born, we are told how to be, how to dress, what to eat, how to look, how to speak, how to behave, what we should want, what is appropriate, what we should study, what we should want to be, and then ultimately what our biological destiny is, right? Which is
Yep.
to service men to bring forth their children, right? All of this is just culturally encoded into women, including what is valued in how you look, what kind of body you've inherited from your feminine line. Is it in line with what's considered beautiful? If it's not, you better change it, right? That you should look a certain way, you should dress a certain way, you should, you shouldn't be too thin, you shouldn't be too heavy, you shouldn't be too tall, you shouldn't be too loud, you shouldn't be too joyous, you shouldn't be too exuberant, you shouldn't be too angry, you shouldn't be too smart, you should, this is part of the issue.
It's
How
the too
women,
much and the not enoughness as well.
yes,
You're not
right,
enough this. You're not
right.
enough beautiful. You're not enough, sexually, whatever.
Exactly. And so we are programmed with this from the minute that we're born, so that when we get into a cultural situation where we feel through the feminist movement, the feminist goddess movement, all of this, which started well, has roots in romanticism in the end of the, not in the beginning of the 20th century, but all the way through the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, when all of this reawakening of the idea of the sacred feminine is happening in culture. Women are finding that, you know, they're rebelling against all the shoulds, that they're tired of the culture shoulding all over them, right? From the time that they're born. And so then they go to explore, who they are, who they want to be. And we're still living in a culture that prizes most a woman who looks a certain way, has a certain eye color, has a certain skin color, has a certain hair color, has a certain body shape, right? And is of a certain age. And then of course, this is our work together is so incredibly powerful because we cover both ends of the female power spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And so looking at how when women age, and when you have major network newscasters, when Don Lemon, just before he got fired for saying this, worked for CNN and said women age out at 40, right? So surprising to me, such misogyny coming from a man who had risen in his field as a gay Black man, to be so dismissive of a particular a particular peoplehood with their own struggles, right?
Because we're all enculturated in the patriarchal stew, right? Each
Right.
one
And
of
and
us.
so here we have, even 5 years ago or whenever it was, right? Major networks coming out with people saying that when you're over 40, so we get into ageism with women, right? We get into
Right.
the fact that not only should you do all this, but you better do it before you're 45, because after
Yeah.
that you are of no value to culture. And once you go through menopause, and oh my God, you're not fertile, and you can't bring forth the progeny of men, then you're really worthless, right? And so
It,
that's another part of patriarchy. and
right.
and so here we have Epstein's entire system not only looking at objectifying and abusing and torturing women, but young women. Once again, we're the whole shadow, the whole mythological and archetypal idea of only women of a certain age are valued is now even further distorted, right? Not only are you of no use over here, but we're going to start using you for this earlier, right?
Right.
We're going to start
Yeah.
victimizing you, or making you the property of, or in service of this depraved um shadow side,
Right.
earlier and earlier.
Which I think has been, I feel like that's been a part and parcel to patriarchy too, right? Like we can see in a lot of these traditional patriarchal cultures where girls are married off around the menarche, which a couple thousand years ago, sometime between 12 and 14, right? And a lot of times, like in ancient Greece, for example, they were married off to men twice their age. And they were married off purposely at this age to men who were educated because they were not to be, I guess they had a certain extent of education. They went to these boarding schools where they learned how to be the perfect patriarchal wives. For example, that's what would happen at the Temple of Artemis just outside of Athens, the sanctuary of Artemis. So I think that that's also part and parcel to the patriarchal project is, you know, okay, so maybe they considered a girl a woman at Menarche. Like maybe that was part of their worldview. Right now, for us, that's like totally, not okay. And they also, that was a culture that also had an institution of, young boys with older men as well, right? That's how these young boys were seen to be educated through the lens of this hierarchical power dynamic of who was on top. The person on the top, literally, um, was the one to hold all of the power in that dynamic, which is still part of what's going on. And there's this weird justification of, or this weird fascination with feminine youth, and male youth in that example, but like this youth is being, and virginity, like wanting, something like a stealing, there's like a wanting this power or wanting something about feminine youth. Um, that patriarchy wants, that it wants for itself, and maybe patriarchal men or men are taught to want and own that and have that power for themselves. And I don't know if for some it's like a literal taking of that power or just wanting to possess it in some way or take it away from little girls. Um, and so yeah, I don't know. I just see that replicated in the mythologies, and it doesn't surprise me somehow that that is happening today too, because as many people have been saying recently, that our beauty standards are based in pedophilic desires. I should not say that word on YouTube because they will, you know, they can um, screw with the algorithm because of that. But we have to be honest about what's going on. Men are literally trained to desire underage girls.
Yeah.
Like that's what they are trained to believe is beautiful. And women talk about internalized sexism and patriarchy, like you were sharing earlier, are trained to think that that is what's desirable and that is what they should portray. You know, I heard another woman say yesterday, this mature woman say, ladies, now that we know that patriarchy is like, trains us to believe that female beauty is based on pedophilic, underage beauty standards. Um, she was like, "Are you ready to start growing out your body hair? Are you ready to start rejecting that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've been growing out my body hair every winter for 5 years." Like, screw the patriarchy. But really, it's like we really have to start as women really looking at the way that we also unconsciously participate in in this culture.
Yeah, I'm not sure when it started, but I know that there's a huge uh or maybe it's even completely been normalized now for adult women um from age whatever, from I don't know, 18, 17, I don't even know how young it goes now, all the way up to be pubically completely hairless.
I know.
And women are, getting Brazilians and having everything, completely waxed down so that they can look like a prepubescent child.
It's
Um,
very disturbing that that's normalized. And some women now have come to the point where not only is it normalized, but they justify why they prefer it,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Um, so anyway, I don't want this to be about, blaming women. I do have to say that I think that patriarchy as a system is upheld because there's enough women that play in the system, and it's
Yeah.
really difficult to it's almost impossible to entirely extract yourself from the
Well,
system.
one of the things in Johnson's essay that was really eye-opening to me is he's like, you're born into patriarchy. There is absolutely no way you do not participate in it. The only choice you have is to be awake and decide how you will participate in those things in which you have a choice.
I think that's beautiful. Because it's true. I mean, it's a big monster. Because the Epstein no, matrix is a beautiful feminine word. It does not. He does not get to take that word from us. Okay. The monster of this, what's being revealed here is, where the trafficking, the sex slavery of women, the abuse of women, the murdering of women and children in this complex, monstrous thing is, shoot, I lost my train of thought again. Can you take over, Andrea?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. When you're looking
I'm
at,
having perimenopausal
I know,
symptoms where I keep losing
okay,
my train of
it's
thought.
okay. Trust me, I have an index that flips, that sometimes refuses to give me words, so don't feel bad. Um, the whole, like you said, this whole monstrous system that's set up for the abuse of women and children, right? The ultimate idea of what you talked about of the sacred masculine, of being the protector, right, of being the men who see to it that the women and the children are protected, right, what are seen as sacred, are seen as sacred part of the human family, right, that
Right,
somehow um in in this world of immense wealth and immense power, to buy off prosecutors, to buy off judges, to participate in in governmental um negotiations and assignations of power throughout the world, that somehow that idea of man as protector um, is dissolved, has somehow found a dissolution in the fact that either these enticements of sexual liaisons with girls who are underage now put the participants in a blackmail situation, now put nations, countries, judges, laws, lawyers. This whole thing then becomes this whole power driven, manipulative extortion structure. And at the heart of it is this deeply disturbing shadow side of men and women who get to the point where their soul and their psyche is so out of balance that they receive their titillation or their sexual enjoyment from the torture of children. There, there is something so
Rancid is the word that comes to my mind.
rant, yeah, and it's from this, it's from something that young I if he were alive, um or Hillman, even if we want to look depth psychologically, right? Or even uh um we look at Marion Woodman, or any of the great female depth psychologists, right? That this this is a symptom of something going on in the collective unconscious. This is a symptom that is erupting like a 4,000-year-old boil,
Right.
having to do with the desacralization of the feminine and their offspring,
Hmm.
and um and the warped, or the missing, or the dissolution of the sacred masculine in relationship with the sacred feminine.
Yeah. I think that's what it's really about. And I feel like this is a time of reckoning. We've already talked about last time about the rise of the feminine, arising within women, arising within the cultural consciousness. Um, I feel like unless we really understand the roots of this monster,
Mm-hmm.
we're doomed to repeat it.
You just took the words out of my mouth. We're doomed
Right.
to repeat. Yep.
Because this is why we talked about the roots in the first place, because this is a pattern. This is not new. Like maybe the widespread globalization of what's going on is new, but this type of behavior, this rape and torture of women and children, and emasculation of men, and and men too, like children, men, like I mean the whole gamut has happened throughout patriarchy. That's how patriarchy sustains itself, is through fear and domination and conquest. Even capitalism has its own iterations of that, and capitalism also exists through the exploitation of the earth, of marginalized groups, of colonizing other cultures' resources and their labor and their ways of life.
Yes.
Um, and so I guess, I keep trying to bring back this point of value. Like, what do we value from the perspective of deep ecology, from ecofeminism, from systems thinking, is that is that life itself exists within these webs of relationships. The
Everything
relationship,
is interconnected. Yes.
everything is interconnected, and every single aspect of life has intrinsic value, from the mosquito to the elephant to the earthworm to every single human being, even to mold. I was writing about that. I was like, what's the point of mold, right? Like toxic mold.
Yeah.
But I think, sometimes it's to show us where the imbalance is. And I think to kind of circle back to the point you were making about depth psychology, when Jung talked about the unconscious, right, and making the unconscious conscious, we're in a moment of seeing the unconscious. We're seeing the rot right now. And I think like with like as a disease, right, you can't heal a disease if you don't know you have it.
Yeah.
And so maybe like we were aware of some of the symptoms. I don't think a lot of us knew how deeply rooted the disease was. So now we're just seeing below some of the layers. I think it's going to get a lot worse. I think we're going to see how rooted and entrenched it is. And then it's, you know, the sexual, this is the point I was trying to make earlier. The sexual slavery was, and the abuse of women and children was the vehicle to do some of the other horrendous things that are happening, whether it's like the arms trade, the forming of different societies, the war, the creation of different war machines, um, and this horrendous sexual abuse was the vehicle to make all this other stuff happen.
Mhm.
And when you devalue certain lives and value other lives over, like the a lot of the women and children, they were from runaways, or they
Yeah.
were on the street, or they were from poor families and poorer countries,
Yeah.
So it's this, there's a values issue here.
Yeah.
Um, that started with patriarchy, and things will not change unless we fundamentally change our value system.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just kind of share some of the comments here. Dr. Lisa says these men are so pathetic that they choose women that haven't stepped into their own power and know enough to laugh at them. Well, that's true. They did victimize young women who, like you said, were in positions where many of them were not surviving on the street. And so $200 or $300 to give a massage was life-saving money for them.
And
And
they didn't have anyone to protect them, right? Like
yeah,
we were talking about,
exactly.
there were no
Yeah.
protectors.
Yeah. And then Zeph says it can be said that the crime of rape has its roots in early patriarchy and warlike culture. In South Africa, it's really bad. Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Can you read some of Agata's comments too? I forgot to read some of
yeah,
hers
sure.
earlier. She's a Rusalka 4444.
Um, yeah, earlier, Rusalka said, oldest profession, prostitution, not to be confused with sexual healing and initiation in temples by priestesses, example of Hathor and Tantricus. Am I right? Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Right.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
right. Then,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, let me just interject really quickly. Sorry. Yeah, I think that there's a sacredness to sexuality
oh,
that's
absolutely.
valued in matriarchy and egalitarian, but it's defiled and controlled and desacralized in patriarchy, and that's how we get prostitution, as I would define it.
Exactly. And then she says, he or she says again later, I'm thinking men in patriarchy are so immature that they're only able for very young women. Older women become too scary. Let's also not forget about the undercurrent of narcissism running through the patriarchal psyche. A narcissist is inherently insecure, both and envies and resents inner power, as in Shakti. And yeah, I think that's very true. And I think it's
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. We have yet to see if men will rise up in their own sacred power to address this imbalance, right? That if and there are men allies who have risen up,
Who are
who
speaking.
who are speaking, who have platforms, who have sacred rage over this situation. But I would say that women have responded in kind, en masse, and would like to see the same, right, from men in our culture, or worldwide. And then
Just to that point really quickly, Andrea, maybe we'll go like 5 or 10 minutes over. Are you
yeah,
okay with
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. Is that I've been wondering the past couple of days how many men, if they had access to that level of power, would have also participated. Because
Well,
right now
and
we're
if they
just,
thought they would never get caught, that it would
yeah,
never be found out, right?
because this isn't, a lot of people keep talking about it as elites operating without impunity. Oops, which is true, operating without impunity. Um, And can you hear that phone ringing?
No, can't hear
No.
it.
Okay, good.
No,
Oh,
it's the
the
men
joys of
calling.
life. Yes,
It's
we're
the
talking
men
about
calling.
patriarchy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that kind of depresses me. I mean, I'm really happy to come across men that are speaking up against it and are sharing their holy rage, but I do wonder like how many others would also participate if they could.
I don't think we'll ever know that, will we? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a secret of the heart, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a secret of the heart. And I think everyone has to, everyone could, not has to, let's say that. Everyone could take this moment culturally to think about um, what they would do in that situation, how they would feel if it was their wife, their daughter, their niece, their sister, their friend, their colleague, or if they were in that position and had that level of power and impunity. Does absolute power corrupt absolutely? Right.
Yeah. That is definitely a reckoning point that we have to sit with as a society, maybe as a world. Like, is it necessary to have that much access to power, to money? Um, what do we do to mitigate that as a society? I don't know what the answer is, but um, let me go back and read some of the comments. Patriarchal psyche. Oh, running. Oh, yeah, I think you said that. Yes. So, Zeph, yes, what I see is that women are better and far more powerful in bed. Yeah, that seems to phase the average patriarch no end. And then Agata writes, no end is right. Terrifying. Yes. Dr. Lisa, yes, I remember when my ex accused me of having become competitive if I didn't eat his BS with a spoon. Yes. Um, Epstein Leviathan. Yes, the good way to bring it back to the monotheistic tradition, the Leviathan, where where a lot of our suffering well, maybe not begins, but it definitely festers.
Well, where it's sitting, it's chubby little butt at this moment, right? You know.
Yeah, so God, I feel like goddess, oh my goddess. I feel like we could sit and talk about this forever. I'm wondering if this is a point where we just share our thoughts on where do we go from here.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we were talking before we were live this morning, and I was saying it just it makes me think of the of the concept that there are as many universes as there are people to perceive them. That we each have our own, our axis mundi, our own staff or walking stick or center point that we put into the ground of our lives, and that's around which our universe spins, right? That's our, who we are, our soul, our spirit, our mind, our psyche, our values, our identity, right? Who we are, what our purpose is, what our meaning, purpose, and belonging is, and how um the idea that there are people's universes that are fundamentally formed around this kind of abuse and debauchery and evil is kind of mind defying to really think about what it must what it must be like to have that be your world or your universe, and how many of us are just out here living our lives trying to, in a crazy world and a crazy economy, trying to take care of ourselves and our loved ones, and be able to contribute what we can to the collective, and to be able to, as I always say, my whole mission is to ease suffering and build community, and then to turn around one day and find that there are hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who are interacting with and contributing, actively contributing to, and consciously knowing about this kind of thing is mind-boggling to me.
It
And
is.
and
Yeah.
what does that mean for people who are out there living their lives, doing the best they can to protect what's sacred and live a full and meaningful life, right?
Yeah, I think Absolutely. I think your last point too, to the sacred, like we're at a point where I think the desacralization is literally eating us from the inside out. Like we're dying, we're killing the earth, we're killing each other. Um, we don't value life. That's fundamentally what's going on here. We do not value life. The God that we live by is the God of money and greed and
Power.
power. Um, and so, yeah, I guess for me, it's how do we resacralize the very experience of being alive, of everything in life, life itself, capital L. Um, how do we return to those principles of namaste, the divine in me honors the divine in you?
Yeah.
And like really live though. How do we really live that every single day? And
I think they,
also,
yeah, I was just gonna, let me just jump in really quick
yeah,
right
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah,
I think that there's only one, well, there's not only one way, but I see this as one particular way to approach it, is that we live by our values and our sacred understandings and knowledge in our inner life, in our
yeah,
outer life, in our families, in our communities, and then nationally.
yeah. That's it. I mean, we have to go back to what is the difference that we can make? We can make a difference in the lives of the people we care about, in the women that you work with, the women that I work with. I think and grieve and like holding space for us to grieve together. This is huge, to rage and grieve together. And I think we have to bear witness to the suffering of others. And hopefully we'll have a whole episode on grief. I know that's one of Dr. Nicola's main points of
Yeah,
focus. And
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think we need to learn how to grieve,
yeah,
because that used to be a cultural value and it used to be governed by women, and it still is in some societies.
yeah,
So I think that that is one of the things that will help us get through this moment is learning how to grieve and witness the pain and not look away. Like that's another thing that I keep coming back to is like we can't spiritually bypass this moment. It doesn't mean that we have to be engaged in every second, but we have to see what is going on and acknowledge it and witness it and
yeah,
bear it.
yeah,
And
yeah. And one of the biggest powers that we have, right, is our vote, right? We have to vote. And I know it sounds really ridiculous, but if you live your own sacred system in your life, in your community, whatever, if you let politics go on as usual, if you don't stand up for what's going to help correct some of these systems, it's going to self-perpetuate, right? It's we have to get involved, right? I think about the people in Minneapolis and I'm like, what an example. Like,
yeah,
what an example. We can, we it has come to the point where we have to stand up for what is sacred, what is valuable,
right.
what do we want life to be, right? What do we want, how do we want to move forward?
Exactly. And that's something I was discussing with some friends this morning, the point of like, we know what we're against. We know what the problem is. And it's really good to recognize and acknowledge the problem. But at the same time, we also need to figure out what we're for. What are we fighting for?
Yeah,
What is it that we want to create? Because destruction and creation are the same event looked at from two different vantage points. And something will always be created in the vacuum of what's being destroyed. And if we do this consciously, we can create something beautiful and meaningful in the place of this patriarchal monster that's in this iteration is dying and gasping and is,
yeah,
and we want to create something better. We don't want to replace it with something just as crappy and oppressive as what's going on
yeah.
now.
And the thing to remember is that, and you and I have talked about this a number of times, is that this kind of change that we're talking about in the fundamental structure of culture globally, much less just in the US, could take hundreds of years
Oh, but
for it
minimum.
to completely change. Could take 1,000 years. Could, as Joseph Campbell said, it takes thousands of years for the new myth to emerge. So
Yes.
as as impatient as we are, as angry as we are, as as much as the generations that are following us are like, we're going to do it with, yes, we're all doing it. We're all standing on the shoulders of the people that came before us. And we have
Yep.
to understand that this kind of incremental change, though it feels tiny, though it feels insignificant, we have to hold the line, right? And we have to make that little,
Right.
however that quarter inch we're going to crawl forward, that inch that we're going to crawl forward, because this
Exactly.
kind of fundamental system change is going to have to happen. And in some senses, it's going to happen quicker than it's ever happened in humanity, or the planet is going to shrug us off like a virus.
Yeah, that's an important point too.
We won't
Like,
survive. The planet is overheating.
yes,
We're giving the planet a virus, right? The planet
yes.
is getting hot.
As
We
much as we think we can control what the planet does,
right.
like it's
Yeah.
bigger than us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what we look at in terms of cultural, systematic, national changes that are coming, having to do with severe climate change. If nobody's ever read what's going to happen in terms of world climate and world ecology, when we get to 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, go do your research, right?
Right.
We have to hold the line, because over the next 1 or 2 generations is going to be the difference between whether humanity makes it or doesn't. The
Well,
earth doesn't care.
right.
Earth will throw us off, and evolution will continue, and new species will evolve, and
Right.
new things will happen.
Because we're just like cells or the parasite, if you want to call it that,
Right,
on the
right,
Earth's
right,
body.
right. So if
Right.
we
And
want to live sustainably, if we want to
right.
live in a balanced hieros gamos of masculine and feminine together in that sacred marriage, if we finally want to get our shit together, we got to do it fast.
Right. Right. Yeah, I agree. And I think bringing back to that point that you were speaking to a moment ago, which is like it's for the children. We're doing this for our children and our children's children and our children's. I don't have children as of right now.
Yeah.
So it's like, but I still care about the future. I'm
Yeah,
still
for me.
invested in
Yeah.
other people's children surviving, right? And I know that
And
there's
you're a
this saying.
representative of the goddess, which is the continuation of all life for all time. And
Right,
so,
exactly.
yeah,
So it's not about me. And I think that's also part of what's going on here. We live in a time that's very individualistic, especially like increasingly so since the the Enlightenment period. There's an acceleration toward individualism. And it's not about me. It's about us. It's about the birds, the earthworms, the bees. We will not be here if we kill off all the bees and the earthworms. They matter, right? And I love this saying from the indigenous world, which is like for the next seven
7 generations.
generations,
Yep.
right? Everything and so when you're thinking long like that, it's not about me, it's about us.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to maybe should we kind of
I think
wrap
that's a
up here
perfect place to
with
end.
let me use Zeph's words, speak
Yeah,
Zeph's words. Words are the earliest form of magic, yes. So let's use them to create new meaningful change as we transition into a new age. Here, here.
absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
So beautiful. So next week we'll be with Dr. Nicola. We'll be talking about more than just dreams. I think the title is going to be Women as Portals or the Body as the Portal, something like that. We'll be talking about the body as a liminal space, and dreams, and women's body as as kind
And
of
it's good coming
the
off
web
of
of
this, talking
life.
about the dreams, the manifestation of dreams, dream images, dream dream information, right?
Yeah.
Psychology, what
She's
kind of
going to be talking about even more than that, though. That'll be just one of the points,
yeah,
one of the major points. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so, yeah, so I think I really invite it's going to be really, really, really interesting, really a dynamic conversation. And yeah, dreams will be our anchor, but it's going to be, and she'll kind of teach us how to use our dreams to kind of connect, I think, with, wouldn't you say, with
Yeah,
something bigger than ourselves? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Any conversation with Nicola is always worth having or being a part of.
Yeah.
She's coming in live from the UK, so we're going to be truly international next week, right? So that's
Yeah,
gonna be great.
exactly. And pretty soon here, I'm going to figure out how to put the schedule for the next few months up on my YouTube, maybe as a post.
Yeah.
So then you can check out to see who's coming up next and the
So maybe
subject
what we
matter.
should do is create like I could either create a page on my website, or we could create a landing page somewhere or something that's just like a little thing place where people could go to see, what's
Yeah.
what's coming up. So we could create our own little sort of mini web thing or resource page or something like that. So
Yeah, we'll figure that out. Yeah, we'll figure that out and keep y'all updated. So thank you so much to everybody that showed up, to everybody that left comments. We love your comments. And Agata, I just want to give you a special shout out. Thank you because you messaged me and you were like, I really think it's important that you talk about Epstein. And I was like, me too. We hashtag me too. Um, we meant to last week, but I think it worked out better this way that we really got to devote a whole episode to it. And as you can see, like we've just touched the surface. We
yeah.
just the surface. So thank you everybody. And don't forget that check out Andrea's links and her and more if you want more information about her course live workshop this week.
Yeah,
It's
and consider going in May to the south of France.
yes.
I would love to go, and I'm still trying to work it out, but I just don't know if I can make it with my schedule. But boy, oh boy,
Yeah.
it's going to be a good one, right?
Yeah, thank you.
And
Yeah.
do you have a link to your to the workshop that you gave for me on Mary Magdalene so people can see a little bit about it or
Almost, almost. I'm still trying to figure out how to embed it in my website properly. So I'm working on that this week.
all right, great, awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Andrea. It's a pleasure, like always.
I know Dr. A and Dr. A, we're A squared coming to you from someplace in the universe.
Yeah, there you go. Oh my God, I was going to make a joke about being on DMT. Then I'll be like, I'm really coming from somewhere from the universe. Okay.
Oh, no, that's on
Um,
our day off. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So I'll see you in a minute, Dr. A, and to everybody else, we'll see you next week.
All right. Take care. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. It's ended on the